Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ty Gregory. I'm the new Executive Director of the JCRC. It's a pleasure to meet most of you who I probably don't have the opportunity to meet yet, or probably will meet for some time, but thank you for joining us for today's webinar. You know, our community is struggling right now. Many of our institutions, like our JCCs, have had mass layoffs and furloughs. Of course, fundraising has been difficult. Congregations are struggling to figure out how to maintain community. But it's very, very important that we not only look inward to protect our own community, but that we build an aggressive civic response to COVID. And that's what JCRC's work in this moment is all about. You've seen us stand up for the Asian community when they were profiled with hate attacked their way, with words like the Kung Flu virus. We've been standing up for the Latinx community who have been marginalized over the past few months. And of course, with Black Lives Matter and racial justice, there's an important effort underway for the Jewish community to be a part of in changing the way that we talk about racial justice and equity in this country. But one important conversation that we're here to discuss today is safeguarding and advancing our democracy. We as the Jewish community, of course, have been a canary in a coal mine for centuries when it comes to the health and the stability of the societies that we live in. And we have a responsibility not only for ourselves, but for the other many marginalized communities, the Black community, the trans community, and more, who are feeling like canaries in the coal mine in this moment. So we are incredibly grateful that the Assembly member has joined us today for this important conversation and for all of you for tuning in to listen. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, our Director of Public Policy, Jessica Chubowicz, to introduce our speaker. Thanks, everyone.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I am thrilled to be speaking with the Assembly member Marc Berman today. Marc was first elected to the California State Assembly in November 2016 to represent the 24th District, which includes Southern San Mateo County and Northern Santa Clara County. In the Assembly, Marc serves as the chair of the Committee on Elections and Redistricting, where he has become a leading voice on protecting voters from deceptive election practices, making election information more accessible to voters, and improving election cybersecurity and campaign finance disclosure. On June 18th, Governor Newsom signed into law Marc's bill, AB 860, to make vote by mail available to all voters. In his first 3 years in the Assembly, Marc has had one of the highest rates of success in the legislature, authoring legislation related to a number of issues, including elections, the 2020 census, education, youth mental health, sexual assault, firearms safety, deep fakes, housing, and the environment. Marc has sent 47 bills to the governor in his first 3 years in office. I've had the opportunity to work with Marc in his role as an active member of the Jewish Legislative Caucus, and I can say that the caucus is doing a great job representing us in Sacramento. A bit of housekeeping before we begin the discussion. This session is being recorded and may be shown again or shared by JCRC. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A with the audience after our discussion. If you have questions at any time, please feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and write in your question. I will be reading them aloud during the Q&A session. So welcome, Marc, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I want to start out just by asking you to give us a little update about Sacramento. What's going on in Sacramento these days?
Sure. And first, just let me say thanks, Jessica and Tyler and the JCRC community for inviting me to come and update everybody on what's going on in Sacramento generally and to discuss the 2020 election specifically. Sacramento, we've been busy. It is a surreal experience. Right when the COVID-19 pandemic was hitting, we adjourned or took a recess. Initially, I think it was for 2 or 3 weeks, and then it got extended and ended up being 7 weeks where everyone left Sacramento and we were working from home. And that was challenging for us. It was the right decision to make in terms of setting the right example for the rest of the state, also for making sure that the legislative staff and everyone who works in and around the Capitol stayed safe. But you know, at such an important moment and challenging moment for the state, we want to be together in the Capitol, working together like we typically do. So we went back in early May, and have been back for, I guess, a little under 2 months now. And it really is surreal when you're used to a Capitol building, the People's House, that is constantly alive with energy and people and excitement, to be empty. Where pretty much it's just the members. We can have one staff member back in our offices in the Capitol. I've decided that's not necessary for me personally. But the halls are empty. Our hearing rooms, we're wearing masks. We're socially distanced. For elected officials to tell us that you can't, get in close contact with colleagues, or you can't, the proverbial shake hands and kiss babies. It really changes the way we're used to operating. But we're doing important work. There's been no more important time than now. I tell people, my job in hindsight was really easy. My first 3 years in the Assembly in 2017, 18, and 19. But it's never been more important than it is now. So we just passed a budget last Friday. We passed my bill 8860 that we'll talk more about, and we're just doing everything that we can to support California's 40 million residents.
Well, thank you for that. We appreciate that. So let's just jump into our discussion about elections and voting. How did that become a priority for you?
Yeah, so I actually, and I don't think it's on my bio anymore, but back in college, the summer in between my junior and senior year of college, I actually spent a summer working in the voting section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department in DC. And that used to be the office where certain parts of the state would have to get pre-clearance if they wanted to change anything in their elections procedures. Unfortunately, largely that office and that authority was gutted by the US Supreme Court about a decade ago. But that, first helped me realize how the difficult history that this country has, and certain parts of the country have, and how important it is for us to ensure that everybody has safe access to the voting booth, or in this instance, at least a vote by mail ballot, for every election. And then after college, I spent a couple of years working on campaigns. I worked on US Senate races in South Dakota and Louisiana, a governor's race in Kentucky. And then in law school, I actually went out to Montana for a competitive Senate race out there to do voter protection, right outside of a Native American reservation in northern Montana, to make sure that everybody had safe access. And so it is a passion of mine. I don't care how you vote. I just want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to vote, and that we don't place unnecessary barriers in front of people's ability to do that. So the fact that I became elections chair kind of fortuitously my first year in the Assembly just aligned really well with this issue that I'm quite passionate about.
I would love to talk about the pre-clearance and the federal, what's going on there federally, but I want to stick to the state right now. So what do you see as your greatest concerns right now around upcoming elections related to COVID-19?
Yeah, I think, it was the day of really the Wisconsin primary that I'm sure a lot of us were aware of in early April, where we realized how badly the election in November could go if we don't change our policies and really equip everybody with the ability to vote safely from the safety of their own home in California in November. And so my biggest concern was making sure that every California voter get a vote by mail ballot in the mail for this November's general election. And it's a simple premise, which is that nobody should have to risk their health and possibly their life to exercise their constitutional right to vote. And California's been a leader on this before, and so we already have 78% of Californians in the primary received a ballot in the mail, but that's still left over 20% of California voters, which is over 4 million people, who would not necessarily receive a ballot in the mail and would either have to request one if they knew to do so, or would have to show up in person on election day. And that's dangerous for them, and that's dangerous for the poll workers if we have too many people needing to go to the polls. And so passing AB 860 and making sure that every Californian gets a ballot in the mail was really important. Now we need to make sure that every Californian knows that the process has changed. And an education and information campaign is going to be really critical so that there's no confusion leading up to the November election, and that people understand, you know, the new systems that might be in place for them in their counties.
Congratulations again on passing AB 860. It's so important for California. I'm wondering, in your thought process around that bill, did you think about accessibility for the elderly, disabled, people who may not have a permanent residence or address?
Absolutely. And then we're lucky in California that there are organizations, including Disability Rights California and other organizations that are very engaged. And so there was a large coalition of advocacy groups that reached out to us and that we worked with closely, and it helped me become aware. So AB 860 says that every Californian gets a ballot in the mail. There's a complementary bill, SB 423, which is authored by my counterpart in the Senate, Senator Umberg, who's the chair of the Senate Elections Committee, that requires in-person voting opportunities for everybody in California, because there are some communities and some people who vote by mail won't work for them. And so we need to make sure that there's in-person voting opportunities, whether you need language access help, your ballot was lost or damaged, or you never received it in the mail, you don't get mail, and you didn't get your ballot, different disability needs that you might have, and so SB 423 speaks to making sure that everybody in California also have an in-person voting opportunity. We want to encourage as many people as possible to vote by mail, so that those who need to vote in person don't have to wait in long lines, don't have to risk their health. But we definitely want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. And now we're trying to work with the counties and the county elections officials, because we know that this is a very challenging situation for them. A lot of their poll workers are often retired community members who have been doing this for a long time, but who are people that we don't want putting themselves at risk this November. And so we need to do more to try to support them and find other people to be poll workers. A lot of people who maybe used to use their garage as a polling location aren't comfortable doing that anymore. So we're trying to be realistic about the challenges that they face and create a new system that's realistic, but that also makes sure that everybody has an in-person voting opportunity.
So we know that people of color generally have more experience with formal and informal barriers to voting than white people. Do you see vote by mail as the antidote to this? Is there other things that you think need to be put in place to address these barriers?
It's a great question. And I mean, in California, I think we do a pretty good job, of eliminating those barriers for everybody. I wish I could pass laws that would impact the voting systems in other states.
Right.
It would be a more than full-time job, because it's been really discouraging to see a lot of the voter suppression efforts that are happening in other parts of the country. But what we can do, and something that we really internalized when this all began, was how can we try to set an example that other states can follow? And how do we make sure that we, be realistic about COVID-19 and the new kind of world we're living in, but prove that does not mean that we need to restrict access this November, because some people's immediate reaction was, take away that opportunity and that opportunity. And that's not the right answer. And if California were to do that, then other states with worse intentions would use California as an example to pass even more suppressive laws. So I'm confident that between AB 860 and SB 423, making sure that everybody gets a ballot mailed to them, but that also every county still maintain in-person voting opportunities. We other parts of AB 860, my bill, also say that ballots can be received at the elections official's office later than, up to 17 days after election day. They have to be postmarked by election day, but there's concern about the postal service. There's concern about interruptions in the postal flow. There's concerns, military and expats who are living overseas, who might have their mail delayed. And so we want to make sure that everybody who votes the right way, everybody who puts that ballot in the mail by election day, has every opportunity to have that vote counted, especially if something happens that isn't their own fault. So I think California has set a good example. I'm constantly looking at what other states are doing. I was actually shocked, all credit to them, that the Kentucky election went off as smooth as it went. I was expecting a disaster, and it wasn't. And there might be things that we can learn from them in terms of, in Louisville and Lexington, they used really huge facilities. They only had one place, but it was a massive place, and they shuttled people from other parts of the county to those locations, and it seemed to run smoothly. Colorado's primary election yesterday went really smoothly, and I already reached out to my staff to say, hey, what are they doing that we could consider doing in California around some parts of our elections that aren't great? For example, they're able to get a lot of election results immediately. And as we all know, California is very deliberate, let's say. And oftentimes our results don't come out or the final results definitely don't come out until much later. So always looking to improve the system, but I feel pretty good about what California is doing right now.
That's great to know, because I was just going to ask you about the best practices of other states, and it sounds like you've got your eye on them. So what is your greatest concern going into November with around voter access and safety, especially for those who may want to go to the ballot box, I guess?
I think right now the most important thing is that we make sure that every voter understands the change system. Some voters already live in Voters' Choice Act counties, and so they've already, like I'm in San Mateo County. San Mateo County was an early adopter of this new model where every voter already gets a ballot in the mail. But there are a lot of other counties that haven't done that. And so it might be a surprise to people when they get a ballot in the mail. It might be a surprise to people when their friend down the street who's had the polling location in their garage for 4 decades doesn't have that anymore. And so we really need to make sure that everybody understands as early as possible this new system that we've put in place for 2020. I am also concerned about making sure that we have those in-person voting locations because like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be more challenging for all the counties, all 58 counties, to identify these in-person voting locations, to identify the poll workers. And so to the extent that, if we need to have some state workers, kind of backfill some of those positions or use state offices for some of these polling locations, we all need to it's an all hands on deck moment to make sure that we have as many opportunities as possible. I have other concerns around misinformation and disinformation and other issues that I've worked on in the past, following up on what we saw in 2016 and a lot of the misinformation and disinformation on social media. So I've authored multiple bills in that space, and we need to make sure that all the different social media platforms are doing their job in monitoring what's happening on their platforms and taking down information that is meant to suppress people's votes and meant to disenfranchise people. Because, let's not kid ourselves, that's what people are trying to do when they say to vote for Donald Trump, text Trump to 246387. They're trying to disenfranchise Trump voters, and we need to crack down on that. And so there's some, looking back, I'll say some simple concerns that we had pre-2020 and pre-COVID that we can't take our eye off those balls. We have to make sure that we're being diligent. But in terms of COVID, it's just really making sure that everybody understand the new system and that we have as many opportunities as possible for people who want to vote in person, but also really encourage everybody to vote by mail, because that's the safest way to do it.
So if you could wave your magic wand and get the federal government to do something around election safety and free and fair elections, what would you be asking them to do? And what do you think that we as voters and citizens should be asking our members of Congress to do?
Yeah, at this stage on July 1st, send us money. Because states need much more resources for our voting systems, both for cybersecurity reasons and for accessibility reasons. And then we're going to need a lot more money for our elections operations because of COVID, and making sure that everybody has PPE, making sure that we're wiping down all the voting booths as soon as they're used. Just a lot of additional. We might have to pay some folks to serve as poll workers that might ordinarily have been volunteers. If the federal government were to pass new policies at this stage, it would really just throw a wrench into an already complicated machine that is pretty far down the road at this stage. Because even though we're 4 months out from Election Day, 4 months, 2 days, but who's counting, out from Election Day, a lot of the planning is already well down the road. And in California, voters will start getting their ballots in 90 days, in less than 100 days. So at this stage, I think resources, money would be really valuable. And then there's much more that I want to see, early in 2021 around cybersecurity and around, some better practices that all states should be following. But we'll wait on those until 2021. It might be a different environment in 2021 politically.
So following up on the funding question, what are the numbers like? Like how are states asking for funding, and what are those numbers looking like? What are California asking for?
I mean, I think in an ideal world, and I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but if I recall, advocacy groups were encouraging us to appropriate, I think, upwards of like $90 million for the 2020 election for California, which was a lot of money for the operations of our elections, and then tens of millions of dollars. I think it might have been 40 million was their request for an education outreach campaign especially to communities where they don't speak English as much, where they might have fear just in general around participating in the election in 2020. We don't have those resources anymore. That was an easier ask in 2019. That's a harder ask in 2020. And that's just for California to have kind of best practices. So I think at the end of the day, we appropriated, it was complicated. There are multiple different buckets, but close to maybe a third to a half of that amount. It definitely was not as much as the advocacy groups were asking for. I'm comfortable that it's enough to operate a safe and fair election in California. But we could definitely use more money, especially for that education and outreach campaign.
If there are groups like JCRC and other nonprofits that may be interested in that outreach campaign and helping with that, what do you suggest?
I please do. And what I would say is, whether it's reaching out to your county elections officials to find out, where are the areas of concern, where they feel like the most attention is needed. But it's also, and we can probably provide information as we get closer to Election Day, but if you want to push out information on your social media channels and your email distribution list to all of your members, just to give them a heads up that, hey, the elections process has changed for 2020. This is, you're now going to get a ballot in the mail. You'll still have the opportunity to vote in person. But it's county by county specific. And so counties are still figuring out, but then you can, point them to the links that have the locations where people can vote early, which are still being determined in real time right now. But I think that's a fantastic idea and then encourage those people to share that information with their networks, so that as many people as possible, understand the new system for 2020 that's in place.
So I'm about to turn to the Q&A, but before I do, I would love for you to share with us just a thought about what's giving you some hope right now.
That's a great question, and you're throwing me off. I didn't have a prompt on that one.
Sorry.
What's giving me hope right now? I think the way that I've seen communities come together, and including, my community and the Jewish community at large, my geographic community in Menlo Park where I live, to help to identify, to reach out to neighbors, to identify who needs a little extra help during these challenging times, and for everybody to step up and help each other. And I think in an ironic way, COVID-19 and physical distancing has actually brought more people together. We're all probably going on more walks in our neighborhoods. We're seeing more neighbors that we never saw before, and starting relationships and friendships with people that didn't exist when we were all running around like crazy and driving around to all sorts of different places. So, I think everybody has largely stepped up. Obviously, there's more that we still need to do, especially as we see the COVID cases kind of spiking in California, largely in Southern California, but there are kind of troubling signs also in the Bay Area. But considering our whole worlds were flipped upside down in an instant, I've really just been impressed and heartened by how much everyone is stepping up to do what's responsible and help out those who need the help.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is uplifting. I'm gonna move to some questions. So the first question I have is there anything being done to make sure ballots will be counted expeditiously? Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier in terms of areas where California could improve, and the counting of our ballots more quickly is definitely an area that can improve. AB 860, my bill, does allow for county elections officials to process the vote by mail ballots before election day, because what they have to do is they open the ballot, they make sure that there's a signature, they make sure that the signature matches the signature they have on file. If there's a mismatch, which I've had in the past because my signature has changed, you have to reach out to the voter, give them a chance to cure the issue. So historically counties couldn't do that until election day. Now they can do that as soon as the ballots come in. They can't start counting the ballots until 8 o'clock on election night. But they can at least do a lot of the legwork ahead of time, so that they're ready to count more ballots on election night. I just this morning emailed my staff, so I don't know, maybe this is a prompt for my staff. I don't know who asked that question, but I emailed them to say, hey, vis-a-vis Colorado, what can we do even more? There might be pros and cons to the way Colorado does it versus the way we do it. But I am very interested in identifying, making permanent some of the changes in AB 860, especially around freeing up county elections officials to start processing those vote by mail ballots earlier. But then, could they start counting them earlier so that right at 8 o'clock, you get a larger dump of counted ballots, so that the public and trust me, the candidates want to know as quickly as possible what the results are, because there's nothing worse than hitting refresh on the register or the county elections officials' websites and just waiting until 2 a.m. to get results, let alone 2 days and 5 days and 10 days after the election. So if that questioner has any ideas, I encourage them to reach out to my office to let me know.
Okay. So the next question, given the pictures we saw of the huge lines to vote in Milwaukee and Louisville in recent primary elections, shouldn't we think of disparities in the number of voting machines or polling places as a kind of voter suppression? And shouldn't there be a standard for the number of voting machines per voter so that everyone has equal access to voting?
1,000%, total, and we have that in California, where we've tried to create a little flexibility in California just for 2020 based on the COVID pandemic and the new reality, and so we've allowed, if counties want to opt into the new system, they can consolidate their polling places, but still have to have the number of voting machines per voter that we have in existing law. So essentially, you can have one location, but you still have to have, the same amount of access as currently exists. And that's an area where, this voting section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department that I interned in 20 years ago would have played a role, where if counties wanted to change the number of polling locations that they had, and if they had a certain percentage of minority voters or people of color or other factors, they would have to get permission before they could make that change. And that was gutted by the Supreme Court about a decade ago. But I think that's absolutely a practice that we should follow. There was, and I still need to dig more into what happened in Kentucky. I know there were some situations in Louisville where, I'm not sure if it was Louisville or Lexington, I can't remember which city, where there were longer lines. And so I think largely people were pretty satisfied with how that process went, but obviously, and I think the lines might have gotten up to like an hour and a half, which is not ideal. It's not as bad as we saw in Georgia and Wisconsin, but obviously we want it to be as short as possible for people. But it's definitely, I have no doubt that there are people in other parts of the country, and maybe even people in some parts of California, that would seize on the opportunity to limit access. And to be honest, our county registrars, who do amazing work, and county elections officials who do amazing work, initially came to the legislature and they said, hey, because of COVID-19, just give us maximum flexibility to do whatever we want to do. And I know that might work in San Mateo County and that might work in Santa Clara County, but I don't trust every elections official in all 58 counties across California. And I wasn't comfortable giving them that carte blanche to kind of do what they wanted. I think it's still important to have minimal safeguards in place. So yes, that's a long answer to a good question.
Okay, let's see. What preparations are in place when there will be challenges to the election results? And can these preparations be replicated in other states with more narrow margins?
One of the most awful, for lack of a better word, things that we're seeing from the highest levels of government is people who are trying to undermine the integrity of our voting process in America and in California, because they're already anticipating results that they're not going to like. And so I know that, and I'm not here in a partisan capacity, but I know that both campaigns, I'm sure, and both political parties have very robust kind of legal teams in place, and we'll make sure, like what I did in Montana in 2006, we'll make sure that there are poll watchers in place, especially in certain communities, to make sure that the election system runs smoothly, to make sure that the ballot counting process runs smoothly, and that there's no question as to the integrity of the results. The reality is that people are still going to question the integrity of the results, and they're already kind of lining up the pieces to do that. And so I think what we need to do is just constantly speak the truth, and constantly remind people that things like voter fraud are exceedingly rare to the point of non-existence. And, you know, the fact that there have been national efforts to identify and root out voter fraud that have disbanded before finding anything, because they didn't find anything. And so, you know, it's just really important. I'm not, you know, familiar with what other states are doing, but, you know, it's important for us to be transparent, to provide access to any political party who wants to be in the room, and kind of see what's going on. And then to push back when people try to attack the integrity of our elections, because they're trying to kind of undermine people's faith in democracy, which I think is just really disappointing.
So
Being the moderator is the hardest part of these things.
yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to. I'm not sure if this question is for you or for JCRC. It says, "Are you guys involved with the networks protecting the vote and also widely reporting related issues?" I don't know if that is for us or for you, but I will say that voter protection and voter rights have been a priority for JCRC for a long time. And so we haven't worked necessarily with those groups, but certainly with other advocacy groups to ensure things like vote by mail are available, have been a priority. Also on the federal level, the Voting Rights Act, HR 4, has been a priority for us. So certainly interested in building more coalitions around this work, and happy to talk with anyone who has some ideas. And let's just see. Okay, well, it actually is perfect timing. I would love to give you an opportunity for any closing remarks, anything else you'd like to say about elections or COVID, the state of the world right now, without going too long.
yeah, that's an open prompt. You know, I mean, first, again, thank you to JCRC for all the advocacy. I mean, we have regular conversations about issues, and JCRC is always quick to step up. You know, when we see things happening in the community, and just to everybody on the line, you know, just look out for your friends and your neighbors. We're all, you know, we're all stressed about the existing situation, and we know as Jews and as the Jewish community that when things get difficult, people look for scapegoats, and historically, the Jewish community is often the first place that people go. We're seeing in the current environment that people are trying to scapegoat some of our friends and neighbors, you know, in the API community, or you know, things happening with a long overdue kind of reckoning with the systemic racism in our country right now. And so just really appreciate everybody who's on the Zoom today, for doing everything that you can to support your neighbors who don't look like you, but who are Californians just like you. And you know, we're in tough times. The government, we're doing everything that we can to maintain the social safety nets and support that we've built over the past decade, or longer, while also kind of recognizing that we're in a different financial situation. But we're lucky that we've built up a pretty good budget reserve that at least softens the blow that we're facing from a lot of the budget cuts that we're being forced to make. And you know, just stay active, stay involved. You know, it's easy for me to say at 39 years old, but there's been no more important time in my life than now, to get engaged and to really fight for what you believe in, and to fight for equality and to fight for fairness. And so, you know, I just really encourage everybody to keep doing that. And if you have any good ideas on things that we can be doing better in Sacramento, don't hesitate to reach out to me, or if you live in another part of the Bay Area, you're assembly member, you can still reach out to me if you want to let us know what's going on. And then also, so many people are struggling, and we are here. My staff is busting their tails around the clock to support my constituents who are struggling with unemployment or reduced hours, and just need more help. So don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for.
We appreciate that, Mark, and we appreciate your time on this call today. We appreciate all your work in Sacramento, especially we love to work with the Jewish Caucus, and all your leadership there is appreciated. Before people get off the call today, I want to offer a next conversation. We have coming up on, I believe, July 26th, a discussion about put on by the San Francisco Black Jewish Unity Group, a forum called In Defense of Democracy, Getting Out the Vote in an Age of Heightened Voter Suppression. And the keynote speaker is Andrea Miller, Executive Director of People Demanding Action. There's also, speaking with her will be Ricardo Ramirez from Voter Rights Advisor at the Brennan Center for Justice, and Pablo Rodriguez, founder of the CNC Action Fund. I will put on the chat right now the registration link so that anyone who wants to register can. And so please just hold on if you're interested. Don't go anywhere, and I'll add that right now. And to everyone else, really thank you so much for joining us today.